On ne meurt que d'amour au cinéma. Welcome to Is It a Classic, where we discuss some famous films and some not so famous films. And about each one, we ask the all important question, is it a classic? Today, we turn our attention to the 1964 film by writer and director Jacques Demy, Les Parapluies de Cherbourg. There will be spoilers. On y va. Okay, you start us off. Give us Les Parapluies de Cherbourg in a nutshell.
This is a film that comes out in what we now, or in the period that we now understand, or was understood then to be the French New Wave. Um, and Demy was a filmmaker who was often grouped with those, or grouped in with those filmmakers. And so I would say that this film, in terms of how you can talk about it, is a film that, like a lot of new wave films, is in dialogue with a certain kind of Hollywood genre of film. And I think there is a productive dialectic here between the sort of MGM Hollywood musical and the social realism that characterizes the new waves of filmmaking across Europe, um, and many other things. But I think that's the key thing here is that this film is a post classical Hollywood new wave musical
Okay, but in dialogue with the classic musicals.
in dialogue with, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. That's great. Let's start as we always do. What do we like about this film? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think the obvious thing to like about this film, the thing that hits you first about this film is the colors. Like the fact that this film was made in color. The color coordination is extraordinary. And it's one of those things where you sort of know it when you see it. I'm not I don't know what you call it, a textiles person, a visual artist, so I can't speak specifically to exactly which colors blend so well with which colors and why. But basically, every single moment of this film sort of radiates sheer visual beauty in terms of the use of color, this eye-popping direct color, um, these pinks and these oranges and blues and everything like that. It's just wonderful. As I say, in terms of that is the first thing that hits you before you even get into what the thing's about. It's the
Or you
color.
about yeah, okay. So I'll piggyback off that and say one of the things I like about this film, I know this doesn't sound terribly profound, but this is a highly cinematic film. I heard or I read a comment from I think the film's producer about the sort of Jacques Demy style, saying it was something like, he kind of gets close to reality without ever stepping completely into reality. And I think that says something about the sort of the visual style of this film. There's it's like hyperreal, isn't it? The colors, the famously the story is really quite gritty and actually quite downbeat, but the colors, the production design, a lot of the backdrops are really quite heightened and artificial, and quite eye popping in many cases. So I love, and that's something that cinema can do. Grind you up against two very competing narratives, sort of real and hyper real, and then just play with the way those two things bounce off each other. So that's number one on my list. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. As you say about the real, the hyper real, and I think it's because he's, as I sort of alluded to in the intro, like he's using the vocabulary of a certain kind of Hollywood cinema, a musical cinema, particularly, as I say, the kind of MGM musicals, the widescreen color musicals of the 1950s.
Yeah.
In terms of the costuming, in terms of all of that. But the distinct thing about this film is that because, as I say, it's sort of a new wave movie. I mean, I mean, in some ways, a new wave film because there's many new waves. But when we're talking about the new wave of the early '60s, usually, quite frankly, what we're talking about is films that have slightly more impoverished budgets than Hollywood
Yeah,
movies that come out in the 60s.
yeah,
And so what happens here in this film is that rather than very expensive sets, as one would find on Hollywood backlots, they seem to simply paint the real locations.
I think that's
Uh,
do, isn't it?
the
It's entirely on location, isn't it? That's exactly
Yeah,
what you do. It's I hadn't realised. I assumed there was some studio interiors or whatever, but as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the entire film was shot on location. So bits that look painted or specially dressed for the film, that's because they were.
yeah, they were, and uh, it speaks to your point about the way that it kind of steps towards reality, or the way that this film reveals or adheres to a certain kind of reality, but also has a fantastical dreamlike edge to it, where it's the real, but it's painted. It's
Yeah,
that close to real. It's not completely constructed. It's not set. But yeah, I think that as you say about this film and how downbeat it is, there's the thing that the kind of the visual style does is it deliberately contrasts with the very deliberate sort of it's difficult to say. I want to say banality of so many of the a deliberate banality of so many of the aspects. The dialogue is full of just like commonplace greetings, like
yeah,
hello, hello, good
yeah,
night.
yeah.
Where's the hardware shop? There's a this.
Yes,
Uh, the film begins with a very um, like prosaic exchange between somebody who wants their car repaired and how long it's going to take and all
yeah,
of that sort of stuff. Like, and they're clearly doing this deliberately. Like the film begins with this huge brassy introduction, but then
yeah,
the first
yeah,
thing that's sung is the most sort of commonplace and
yeah.
most prosaic.
Yes,
And
yes,
that's kind of what the color is doing as well. The color is it's colorful sets, but it's pretty
yeah.
small town locations.
You said something the last time we spoke. Remind me, you quoted a line. I can't remember if it was Picasso or "the lie that tells the truth" or something like that. Was that the art is the lie that tells the truth? Was that right?
Yeah, Picasso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's what's going on here, isn't it? The kind of the artifice uh, paradoxically underlines the reality of the film, and that just shouldn't be true, should it? I mean, on the surface that doesn't make any sense. You make something somewhat more artificial, you'd expect the whole thing to become more artificial. But I think the responses of audiences over the years has been that people get more and more sucked into the story, inevitably helped by the artifice of the surroundings. Strangely enough.
I think that's one of the most distinctive, successful aspects of the film. As I say, thinking about it as a in amongst the new wave films, is that one of the characteristics of new wave cinema, particularly French new wave cinema, in terms of the leading lights, like a Godard, Truffaut kind of thing,
Yeah,
is this kind of deconstructionalist aspect that
yeah,
we do sort of associate with French intellectualism and all that sorts of things. It's this kind of wanting to remove um, and problematize aspects of the storytelling or the construction of
yeah,
the narrative, as it were. This, oh, and I should say, like, there's Michel Legrand wrote a score for a color film that was a musical that Godard had made called A Woman is a Woman in 1961. And
yeah,
that is very much something that kind of has that sort of deconstructionist Brechtian thing of not quite allowing you to go along with the story.
yeah.
But to your point about how, if anything, it heightens the immersion. Like this film has deconstructive aspects. It has kind of fourth wall breaking lines sprinkled
Yeah,
in and everything like that.
yeah.
But one of the things that really works about it is that it does actually work
Yes,
as a emotional journey,
yeah,
a thing
yeah,
where you can invest in these characters and their
yeah,
emotional lives. It's
yeah.
completely sincere about that.
Yeah. So listen, let's move on. And we'll stay in the same spirit of things that we like, but let me just move on to something else. While we're talking about artifice that actually works and draws you deeper into the story, let's talk about the decision to sing the whole thing. We've touched on that already. Just a couple of points to say, again, my own learning when I was reading about this film. I've seen and read interviews with Legrand where he says they spent about a year hawking the idea for this film around different producers in France, like a literal year, just dragging themselves around, being turned down by everybody who said, you got to be kidding. You cannot sing the whole script. You can sing some of it, and then let's have dialogue. But if you're proposing that you're going to sing every single line of the screenplay, then I'm out of here. And he tells some very interesting stories about that and about how they eventually kind of turned that around and actually got the film made. But another thing that I like about this film, while we're talking about the artificiality that nevertheless works, is it does actually work amazingly to sing the entire script. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? It didn't spawn a decade of musicals that did the same thing. It just didn't actually. It's practically a one-off. I mean, obviously, it's no big deal in the world of kind of classical opera and so on. But in sort of popular culture, in film musicals, it's a little bit of a one-off. Maybe that tells its own story. It worked so well, but it wasn't the kind of thing you could replicate. But I actually think it's incredibly artificial. It does nothing to lock you out of the emotional engagement with the story. And in fact, I think it does do the opposite of that. Amazingly, it sucks you in. What do you reckon?
Yes, I think the reason it it sucks you in is because of the quality of the Legrand score. I
Yeah,
think there's something about the melodies and the phrases and the themes that he comes up with that prevent it from, as you say, distancing you. Like the music is emotionally involving. I remember seeing an interview with him where he was talking about how, because he is associated with jazz, and he says it's not jazz because it doesn't swing, but there's a jazz phrasing in the way that they
there is.
sing. But the melodies are from it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's a grab bag, but there's some lush pop. There's some kind of
Yeah,
there's yeah, balladry. There's all sorts of things in there.
yeah, yeah,
Um, it does kind of, and there's, it ranges from swing band orchestration, big
sure.
brass, to with the kind of I will wait for you bit, the choirs, big choirs, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I saw
yeah,
an interview with Legrand, just to pick up the point that you made, where he said somebody commented on how natural the singers were. And obviously, it's not the actors who are singing. We know that. I think that's pretty common knowledge about this film. They're all dubbed. Um, but somebody commented on how natural the singers were in terms of putting across the lines of dialogue in a very smooth and relaxed way. And Legrand said he felt that was the jazz influence. That was the biggest jazz influence in the score. Although it's not jazz, that there's a beautiful kind of suppleness and a natural kind of rhythm and intonation that jazz singers have and jazz melodies have that he managed to get into the score and kind of into the heads of the singers who recorded the score for the actors. And I think, that's kind of what you're picking up there. There is, I think, from an insider's perspective, that's the jazz influence. I mean, there are actually some parts of the score that are explicitly kind of 1950s themed jazz, but only like 10-second bursts. It's mostly not. But yeah, I mean, he felt there'd been a big jazz influence on the kind of the quality of the singing, and that helped it to sound natural, given that there were a lot of other factors that were counting against it sounding natural.
yeah, I think yeah, and it's funny, yeah, to your point about how there isn't a lot of other films that did this thing, despite the massive success of this film. And I think this kind of was a worldwide success. I feel like the music itself was actually very influential on music. I
Yeah.
think that, you look at something like, I don't know, like the Walker Brothers or
totally.
Springfield, and all of that kind of stuff. The grand orchestrations,
Yeah,
because I think it says composed and conducted, but it's just like
yeah,
I think so much
yeah,
60s pop came
yeah,
from
yeah.
the success of this soundtrack.
I mean, I'm gonna stay disciplined here because I could wax lyrical about this, and shut the entire internet down with how boring I could become. So I'll try and stay short and sharp. For people of a certain age, if you were a kind of a kid with sort of big ears in the 70s, let's say, growing up, this I only later realized the sound of a lot of the music that my parents were listening to, a lot of the kind of pop and the lighter music that was being played on the popular radio stations or the records that were popular being bought and played at home at that time. The sound of Michel Legrand was kind of in my ears a lot. And I had no clue of that when I was a kid. But looking back as an adult, and you think of what melodies was I hearing and what was the sort of the sensibility of a lot of the melody in a lot of the tunes. And then when you dig down into Legrand specifically, so you go back to the mother lode, as it were, and you think, oh, that's where it came from. Yeah. And as you say, it might be the Walker Brothers that you'd been listening to that was the earworm, but then you trace it, but you pull that thread and you go back to the source and you find, this amazing French talent who've been turning out tremendous amount of influential music. Sometimes you were listening to his actual music, but other times you were listening to, the incredible breadth of his influence.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of things that went on, what do you think of Catherine Deneuve in this
Yeah,
film? This was probably like the big breakout role for her.
yeah. Was it second, third film, something like that? I think.
This was in terms of number of films, I think this was maybe the seventh or eighth, but
Okay.
because she had been, I think she'd been married or something like that, or she maybe had a child with Roger Vadim, the director who was with Bardo and later on did
Okay.
Barbarella with
Yeah.
Jane Fonda. And I think he was a kind of she was a sort of protege of his, and he was trying to um, push her as a similar kind of star to
Yeah.
Bardo. But this film is, I think, because it was a worldwide success, the one that introduced the world to her.
Yeah.
Um, and she has said subsequently that she felt like Demi was the director that kind of really discovered her for who she was and the one that she valued the most. And what do you think of her presence in this film? Because she's not quite the same kind of screen presence that she would be later on, but she's definitely somebody who is very striking, and not just in terms of how she looks. There's a kind of um, I don't know I don't know how to say it, but it's like there's a guileless there's a guileless quality to her. There's something
Yeah.
very open-hearted about her, you know.
Yes. I saw an interview with Demi where it was a contemporary interview from the 60s, I think, from on French television. And he, I think he had the maybe, even allowing for the passage of time, I think he had the grace at the time to look a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but he said he quite liked his sort of female leads to be uncomplicated. And he didn't want them to be thinking too many profound thoughts or asking complicated questions about life. And I think that was a kind of a slightly diplomatic way of saying he liked them to be incredibly attractive on screen, but not terribly challenging as characters. And I would say Genevieve, that's exactly what she is in this film, isn't it? The Deneuve character. She's a beautiful on-screen presence, but she doesn't make many demands on the viewer or on any of the other characters in the film either. A little bit of snipey dialogue with her mum when they have to discuss her being pregnant, but she's not a terribly demanding, not a terribly layered character. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. I think that is a characteristic of his filmography. He very much likes and as you say, he's copped to this. He likes the somebody a character who's not an intellect. I think he said intellectual who's fussing over things. He likes a simple girl. And but I think I think that's maybe true of a lot of his male characters as well. Although I think he does have slightly more complicated men. I'm thinking of because there's the character from his first film, Lola, Roland Cassard, who returns in this one.
Yeah,
In that one, he is, quite a typically, um, young French male protagonist of the time,
yeah,
a lovelorn, romantic, kind
yeah,
of act, thoughtful,
yeah,
pensive young man. Uh, and yeah, I think that I think that the thing is that I think he's said that he would like his films to be very much like this, like the women. I mean, he didn't want to make films that were intellectual, more sentimental, I think is the phrase that he used. It. He wanted to have films that had a great emotional life, and so as there's a there's a degree to which, as much as one might, there might be charges of simplicity there. There's a kind of he's going for something kind of an emotional purity with
yeah,
the filmmaking, not just the characterization, but the filmmaking. And he kind of does succeed at that. And if it requires sort of paring down the characters, because I
yeah,
would say the character of Guy in this is not massively more complicated than Deneuve's character. He's given a little bit of shading when he's depressed about losing her,
yeah,
but not a massive amount more, you know.
yeah. I saw an interview with Demi in which he said, um, "I wanted to make people cry, and I succeeded." Um, and maybe that's what you just said. Maybe that's the whole thing in sort of one sentence. You can analyze that into at multiple levels, but at the end of the day, that's the writer and director himself saying, "Look, I wanted to make people cry, and I succeeded." And you're probably right, and that some of the emotional depth needed to be pared back. Some of the potential character depth had to be sort of excised, or not necessarily excised. It wasn't even there in the first place. Didn't need cutting out in order for him to achieve that objective.
Yeah, because and I think the emotions in the film are quite complex. I think the material is very simple. The material is like a lot of really good movies. It's like kind of a short story stretched out over an hour and a
Yeah,
half or so. It's a kind of episode, but particularly near the end, the idea that she hasn't waited for him. She's married partly seemingly because of her mother kind of needling her
yeah,
to make a
yeah,
match, a certain kind of match. And some have
yeah,
said that the class aspect to that there is this thing about a mechanic and a shopkeeper's daughter. This
yes.
other fellow is clearly well to do, um, and but he makes.
Let's be honest. She says she'll wait forever. She, I don't think if you do the math, she doesn't even wait 9 months. So
I think she didn't wait like 4 months. I think I think from the way that they
yeah, I
set it
think you've got to go back and spool through, but you can do the dates.
up.
It's not
Yeah,
long.
it's not that long, but she obviously there's a bit of a ticking clock because she's
Sure.
pregnant, and that there's a weird there's an interesting sense in which as I say like at the top like social reality makes its way into the movie. That there's a
Yeah,
kind of this is pre-contraceptive pill, going to bed with somebody with your
exactly.
young partner and then facing the consequences of that. And then obviously there's the Algerian War, and I think at the time it was considered to be one of the first films to take the issue of the Algerian War that I think was very much something that you weren't allowed to talk about in
Yeah,
films, and films that were banned because of their direct engagement with it. Um, and I think maybe by this point there was a bit of relaxed it was a bit more relaxed in terms of the censorship. I know there was a famous thing where Godard made a film in '61 which just got outright banned. But it does take these things seriously. It doesn't as we say about the the artifice and the reality. It doesn't melodramatize those aspects. It presents them as matter of fact, and so
Yeah.
their dilemma
Yeah.
is very commonplace. As I say, the emotions are quite complex. The fact that
Yeah.
um, he makes a choice when he gets together with Madeline at the end. There's a very conscious, he has decided that he is going to make this life, and he's decided not to look back and not to pine. And
Yeah.
obviously, there's the famous ending scene where we can see that there's these complex emotions, like when he kind of does refuses to see the daughter, and he sort of says, "Oh, you can go now." There is something slightly hard about that he's shutting the door and he's choosing to do this, and maybe there's a part of him that doesn't want to, and everything like that. It has an emotional complexity that maybe if the film is intellectually not that complicated in the sense of its engagement with the Algerian war is not, comprehensive, or its engagement with I don't know, the class politics of a small seaside town are
Yeah.
not comprehensive. The
Yeah.
emotional stuff, I think, is.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that's great. Is there anything else that you want to mention? You know, let's keep this manageable. I think it's a very, very enjoyable film. I could talk for ages about all the things that I like. Is there anything that we really need to pull out that would be absolutely terrible to overlook at this stage? Anything that's important?
Oh God, what have we done? We've done the look, we've done the sound, we've done the. I tell you, I think one of the most it bears mentioning. One of the most impressive things about this film is the fact that you remember that the performers had to mime exactly in time with the
Yeah.
music. Like
Yes.
once it hits you that they had to do that, and they had to move exactly in step, and they couldn't pause or add anything after that.
Yeah.
Like the triumphant job that they've done on that is kind of unbelievable. You even though, yes, you know that it's the actor, not the
Yeah.
actor singing.
Yeah.
It's so incredibly seamless, and I
I
think a
wonder
lot
if
of
that's
the
one of the
effect.
reasons why this film didn't really set a precedent because
Mm,
because that's a lot harder than you would think. We're very familiar with musicals in which the actor has their voice dubbed during the singing, um, and to some extent, not to some extent, it's very common. Less common now, but it used to be more common that actors would have their voice dubbed throughout the whole of a speaking film. But to have actors having to dub having their voices sung for them and them having to lip sync to an entirely sung score is kind of more difficult than either of those. It's like, both of those two things put together, and then the difficulty is multiplied. So I just wonder if it was just the sheer faff and hassle of asking actors to sort of turn in a convincing performance whilst lip syncing to a score in which every word and every syllable of their dialogue has been set to music. Maybe it was too different. You just couldn't. It couldn't become a genre, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
I think it probably is that, that it's such a faff to stage, and I think there's probably the other thing of it. I don't think, because some people, when they've seen this film, have said, "Oh, it's a little bit repetitive musically," because he reuses themes, and you realize that writing about an hour and a half of continuous music
Totally.
is unbelievable, because it's like anybody who's ever tried to write
Yeah.
like 6 or 7 minutes of
Yeah.
music knows how difficult it is. So
Sure. Yeah.
writing something that it can stay compelling for a full 90 minutes. So like any composer, he reuses themes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think he does it very effectively, but I don't know if that's everybody's that's a lot of work on each end of the
Yeah.
process. That's a lot of
Yeah.
work going in,
Yeah.
and that's a
Yeah.
lot of work when they're staging it.
Yes.
So I always think of like the way that Morricone worked, Ennio Morricone, the composer, where he wrote a lot of music for those Sergio Leone films,
Yeah.
like Once Upon a Time and everything. But for some films, he would simply provide a sort of 3 minute theme that then they would repeat throughout the
Yeah.
film. Because he
Yes.
would be like, "That's all you're getting for
Yeah.
your horror
Yeah.
movie. It's
Yeah.
not. It's a 5 minute thing."
Maybe just before we move on, I'll just add one more thing on the back of what you've just said. there are some great interviews with Legrand out there, and some of them I think are bundled up on the, is it the Criterion Blu-ray, the remastered release of this film. There are some great interviews with Legrand. There's a terrific, again, contemporary one from French television from about 64 or so. Is clearly was kind of interview that kind of coincided with the release of the film, in which a very sort of grumpy French interviewer is putting him through the mangle, really saying, what's this thing where they sing all the time? That's an absurd idea. Nobody does that in the real world. And also really kind of weird, slightly patronizing questions. It's a fantastic interview for fans of Legrand or just fans of artists who are able to demonstrate grace under pressure. Because this guy basically says, aren't you wasting your time? You're a really talented guy. What are you doing writing music for films? You know, films with all this weird singing all the time stuff. It's that interview that I've got in mind is a beautiful example. Legrand just parries all the questions fantastically, and incidentally, a naturally occurring real life example of a French person saying "ooh la la," which English people tend to think is a made up expression that real French people don't say. But Legrand says it twice when this guy suggests to him that a serious musician is wasting his time writing music for films. Ooh la la, he says. What a terrible suggestion. He said it's a beautiful art form. And it's and you know he then kind of parries with the sort of the classic line of, you know, if Bach and Beethoven were alive today, I have no doubt that they would be composing music for films, amongst other things. So you know, great. Seek out those interviews if people haven't seen them before. Some beautiful extra material kind of wrapped around this film. I need to move us on, I think, just in the interests of us staying reasonably concise and focused. I want to turn our attention to what we don't necessarily like about this film. I will go first, if that's okay, because I just want to put a flag in the sand, as it were. This is slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I want to know what you think about this. I feel like I don't quite understand why Madame Emery's umbrella shop had to go under when it's always raining in Cherbourg. I feel that's a slight weakness of the film. And why doesn't she diversify? She could sell raincoats, waterproof shoes. Is that a fair objection, or do I need to spend time thinking about what I've just said and feel ashamed of myself?
Doesn't she leave? Doesn't she leave Cherbourg?
Uh,
Isn't that?
well, eventually she does, but it's because the business is in trouble, isn't it?
Oh, I see.
You
Okay,
see what I
yeah.
mean? It's a
I
very
see.
rainy place, and they're
I see.
selling umbrellas. You'd think that they could have made a go of a business there, but on the other hand, it's a bit of a strange thing to sell only umbrellas in a shop, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah. But it's one of the more I think overtly romantic things, and I mean don't mean romantic in terms of the romantic. What do you call it? Small R romantic. About
Yeah,
about the encroach of modernity. The fact that it becomes a washing machine shop is clearly some kind of
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Some comment on the march of technology and progress. Okay, so we'll move on from that one because that was shamefully trivial. Over to you. Anything that you didn't like about this film?
I think it goes from what we were talking about earlier about some of his female characters. I think that the character of Madeline is so incredibly docile in this. It just seems like a real afterthought. Every time I watch the movie, it's not so much that I don't believe the romance between them. It's simply that when we were talking about earlier, like it's like uncomplicated women. It's like, I think that Deneuve as a screen presence maybe has enough something or other in order to flesh out the character as presented or as written. I think that the part of Madeline is, I think, so massively undercooked. It feels like a plot thing rather than
Yeah.
like a character, like a real person.
Yes. Yeah. I thought that exactly. I've seen this film a number of times, but I hadn't actually seen it before I watched it for this conversation. I probably hadn't seen it for 20 years. and I didn't carry a memory of that character particularly strongly. So when I watched it again recently, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I was a little bit shocked actually. She's just a sort of a, this, she's just hanging around, isn't she, really? As a faithful, relatively empty vessel who's super helpful, super loyal. And it's almost like she's just waiting for Guy to say, to make her an offer. And as soon as he does or hints at it, she's like, oh, yeah, I'm totally up for that. And then the whole of the rest of her life is made alongside his life. She throws her lot in with him. But yes, very passive. Um, and although I did see some commentary, okay, maybe let's. I don't know if this winds that back in or not. You give me your opinion about this. I did see some commentary about the production design that said that there's just two or three moments in this film, particularly striking moments, where the female character's dress it mimics the background colors of the room that they're in. And there's one particular moment where that's true of the Deneuve character. She's wearing, I think, a pink sort of floral pattern dress, which matches the wallpaper in the room that she's in. And then at the end with Madeleine, she's dressed in orange, and Guy arrives, and she's sat, I think, at a table, isn't she, outside a cafe? She's in orange with an orange hairband, and the cafe is painted orange, and so on. And I saw an analysis, or I listened to an analysis that said that that was done entirely to show that he was coming into her world, that he had to enter. So the world was now orange, as it were. I appreciate that's a clunky way of summarizing it, but that, he had to enter that world that was now kind of going to be painted in her kind of tones, her shades, her colors, her moods. I don't know how convincing you or anybody else finds that.
I think it plays into something that is characteristic of Demi's cinema, which is that he is very into the notions of fate and chance. And as people might know, chance is a huge part of surrealism and surrealistic thinking, and chance encounters, chance as something that can create the marvelous or the wondrous in everyday life. And I think the connection there would be that Demy was very influenced by Jean Cocteau, the filmmaker, novelist, poet, who was, in some senses, a surrealist, perhaps in some ways, not entirely. But I think that this film is quite a lot about the choices that people make in their lives according to the circumstances made available to them.
Yeah,
Uh, and there are times in this film where somebody has autonomy and makes a choice, but it's maybe it's too late or whatever it is. And there's times when it seems like there is no choice and people are painted in a corner, as it were. And what happens to Catherine Deneuve's character, Geneviève, is like there's a certain kind of confluence of events where, because she's pregnant, because her mother's pressuring her, because she's in the situations that she feels as if she has no choice. She can't wait. She has to make the decision
yeah,
to marry this jeweler, not this dealer, and and as I say, at the end, Guy, he makes a conscious choice. He says, "I'm going to forget about Geneviève, and yes, I'm going to enter your world." Like he, as you say, he comes over to her. But the thing that's interesting about when this film comes out, and there's a documentary that kind of tries to paint the time of it exactly, where it was like, oh, the Beatles are the same year, the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, and everything. I think the autonomy of youth, the kind of the explosion that we were to understand, because in a strange way, this film's strangely positioned in terms of social history, because this is almost like, yes, this is bang on the money. This is the year of Hard Day's Night. This is the kind of uh, key 60s pivot point where the early 60s becomes the late 60s, as people have
yeah,
said about it was black and white into color. Um, and what it depicts, because it's set in the late 50s, is a sort of a youth without autonomy, not the freedom, the free youth, the exuberant youth. You kind of get it, only a bit of that at the beginning, and with they're going to go to the funnily enough, they go to the opera but they go to the dance hall as well. But the I think that the character of Madeline is depicted in such a way that it seems very kind of early 60s, almost pre-Watershed. Like, this is a woman who's not really choosing her life. She's just
Yeah.
doting on others. And I
Yes.
don't know if he'd have been able to get away with that characterization a mere 3 or 4 years later.
Yes.
He would have, but we'd
He
it
might have
would.
tried. Yeah. Well, listen, I
Yeah.
want to jump in there actually and just say that I think it's maybe one more thing, certainly that I would like to talk about. While we're talking about things that we're not so keen on with this film, and I'm going to piggyback this on the back of what you've just said in terms of the kind of the ripeness of those characters over time, or the extent to which they've gotten the endurance beyond the period in which they appear in that film. Um, we probably should mention La La Land because it's essentially a remake of this film, isn't it? I mean, that's not. I don't think that's particularly controversial. I mean, it's its own film, but it's hugely in debt to this and some of the other Demi films as well. Um, and for instance, I think it's no. I mean, we haven't got time to do. That's a whole separate discussion. It's interesting how the plot of La La Land tracks the plot of Cherbourg, and it's interesting how it doesn't. And for instance, there's no Madeline. There can't be a Madeline in La La Land in the way that there is in the original film. Um, and actually, I just ask you, it really struck me that there's about 50 years between Les Parapluies and La La Land. And La La Land is now about 10 years old. It's I want to avoid us going down any culture war rabbit holes, but I was quite interested that you could still make a version of Les Parapluies 50 years after it was made. I'm not sure you could make La La Land now in the way that it was made in 2016. What do you think about that?
How do you mean in terms of it's about a woman following her ambitions and the
Yeah, I mean,
impediment?
I think the female character is given a lot more agency, a lot more independence, but it's still recognizably a love story between a man and a woman who kind of meet, fall in love, have a difficult time in the relationship, and then pursue their separate paths. And to varying degrees, each of them gets what they said that they wanted. That's the that's the kind of the narrative arc of Les Parapluies. That's the narrative arc of La La Land. Yeah, it's a relatively conventional love story, but I think you would be required to problematize a relatively conventional love story now, only 10 years after La La Land was made. Tell me if
I
you're
think
up the wrong tree.
I think it's interesting. I think that there was a short revival of the conventional love story because the model that you're talking about, so the idea of a man and a woman fall in love, and in the sort of the old world sense of these kinds of relationships, it is very much like the man might be they fall in love, passionately, devotedly in love. The man might fall into some kind of trouble, and the woman, in her devotion, may have to sacrifice something of her own life in order to keep this together. And then it either does or it doesn't happen. The kind of the great Hollywood model of this is A Star Is Born.
Yeah,
It's the woman sacrifices her career in order for because she has such an overwhelming emotional attachment to this troubled
yeah,
man. They made a version of A Star Is Born the year after La La Land, the one
okay,
with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. So it was almost like that old model, which, as you say, we would now kind of maybe be more inclined to deconstruct and shift around a bit. Like that had a weird kind of 18-month
okay. That's great. Yeah, I hadn't thought of A Star Is Born as being, basically practically next door to La La Land in terms of release dates and so on. That's a good point. But okay, let's not make too much of it. But it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall if somebody tried to pitch pretty much the same story again now. I mean, nobody would. It's only 10 years since La La Land, but it'd be interesting. Interesting, food for thought. But let's not get any further down that rabbit hole. Can we move on? Is
Yeah,
that
sure. Yeah.
we don't like? Yeah.
I think I think yeah, there's nothing else that springs
Nothing.
to mind.
All right. So, time to ask the all important question: is it a classic?
For me, yes, unequivocally so, because of its emotional power. It's like it's extraordinary. But I mean, we didn't even really talk about the final scene, which is in a way like I would hate to say the centerpiece of the film. It's like but it is kind of the thing that it's leading up to. It's holding a lot in for that, and then it's a scene where if you've seen the film before, the earlier scenes have lots of nods to what eventually happens, which make the entire film more powerful,
Yes.
uh, which is amazing. Including, and I didn't notice this until this particular viewing that the guy who rolls up in the garage at the beginning is Roland Cassard, the one who's like when he says, and I didn't notice it until this. I've seen the film maybe half a dozen times. I didn't notice it
Uh,
until this point. When he says, "Can you stay an extra hour and attend to this gentleman's car?" And he says, "I can't. I've got to go to the opera." Um, it is Roland Cassard who's
okay.
standing there, and
Okay. Off my cap.
so,
Well,
yeah, absolutely. It's
I
it, and
told me it's obvious, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, and I mean, there's more poignant ones like when they're walking by the dockside, and she says, "Oh, we'll have children, and it'll be called Francoise, and
Hmm.
you'll smell of gasoline all the time." All of which becomes true, except the
Yeah.
salient, the pertinent detail that they don't end up together. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, but that for me,
Yeah.
that works so incredibly well to this day. It's like a beautifully constructed film, I
Yeah.
guess. Is
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I'm going to agree with that conclusion as well. I think it's definitely a classic. And actually, when I was watching this and thinking about it afterwards, I was reminded of a part of the discussion that we had about the Maltese Falcon, which was this is a very kind of realistic, very kind of grown up narrative. And I think that's why it's a classic because, we try not to get too introspective about this, but a classic has got to have something to offer beyond the time in which it was made. It can be a good film, but it can, run out of puff as it goes over the years or run out of energy beyond the decade in which it's made. It's got to be able to do something that travels across time. And I think what really, as well as all the stuff we've already said, which is excellent about the film, I think there's something fabulous about the combination of melancholy and joy in this film. There are some wonderful highs and there are some very, very low lows. And the fact that they're both integral to the overall enjoyment of the film is, in a sense, is almost like part of my working definition of what might make a film a classic. That you've got extremely contrasting emotions that are highly realistic and that somebody manages to get them to work together in the same narrative. Very clever.
Yes, yeah. I hate to drag the discussion back a step, but I was going to ask you like what you thought of Roland Cassard, the character, because I feel like people have quite divergent reactions to him when you see him. I was thinking about what you're saying about melancholy and joy, and how, as I say, because he appears in Lola, his part in that story is of the spurned lover, which a story he recounts in this movie, and in his role in this story is somebody that you might not think so favorably towards, but it's pure chance. He's only uh, disfavored in this context because we're telling a different story. And so it's that kind of we should be feeling joyous that a character that we followed before has finally met his love. But actually, we feel melancholic because we've taken the story from a different angle. So,
Yes.
what do you think? What do you think of all of him? You know,
I watched a New York Times film review, and the guy that was doing the review coined a beautiful line. He said about Cassard, it's something I'm going to mangle it now, but it was something along the lines of who is in fact a nicer man than his moustache would have you believe. And I thought, okay, I think that captures kind of both sides of it. That's the kind of 1960s styling has worn very well on some of the characters and hasn't worn very well on him at all. What did I think? I felt it was a little bit of a. I find it a little bit hard to take characters like that very seriously because a little bit like Madeline, and I guess um, he's the equivalent character to Madeline on the other side of the relationship. A little bit like Madeline, it feels a little bit like he's in the story to provide a particular function in the plot, which is actually which is a trope really. The indulgent, wealthier older man who kind of says, "I will scoop you up. We'll make all this good. I've got plenty of money. We can make this work. I don't mind that, you're slightly damaged goods or whatever. Doesn't matter to me. This will all be perfect. Come with me. I can make this work for both of us. In other words, I was a bit distracted by what is obviously his function within the narrative to take his character too seriously. Okay, maybe that's a little bit unfair to him, but perfectly decent character, but he has such a clear function in the plot to drive the story along that I didn't get a sense of him as a person very much.
in terms of the mustache, it is almost like a 1930s Hollywood movie villain
Ronald
mustache.
Colman or something.
Yeah, but he also has what we might understand in England to be a kind of spiv
Yeah,
mustache,
yes,
Like, so it's a very, I guess it is supposed to indicate that he is sort of like he's new money, as it were, that he's
yes,
made and he's decked out in all the ways in which that, and he can offer her a life of, I guess, the upper class, um, by owning his own petrol station. The guy becomes middle class.
yeah,
So there's this sense of they're still separated at the end, but in more ways than one.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, I think yeah, just because some people they see him on screen and they're like, oh my God, this guy, and I think because Deneuve is clearly her character, as you say, Geneviève is so clearly not that enthused by him
no.
uh, at all whatsoever.
While we talk about this exact point, um, I feel like the end of this film, I feel like Guy. I feel we are being prompted to think that Guy is happier than Geneviève.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that? I mean, I'm not suggesting that's a radical interpretation. I may be the 1 millionth person to say that, but there's in one sense there's meant to be a sort of a symmetry to it. They've each gone their separate ways and they've kind of achieved what they would have wanted. But I feel like he's more grounded. He's happier. She's got the air of someone who's living with a compromise more than he has, although we're supposed to think that that's a compromise because Madeline is not Geneviève. But actually, it doesn't come across like that at the end of that film. It comes across as if he's actually having a nice time, whereas she is working to stay slotted into that more prosperous lifestyle.
Yeah, I actually think I'm really glad you said that because I think in some senses that is the most profound thing that comes across in the film. It is the, as I say, as I said earlier about the notions of fate and chance. It is in some sense, both of them appear in the film to compromise. Like she sort of caves to pressure, as Geneviève says, she caves to pressure and she marries this person who can set her up and provide a good life for her and their child and everything like that. And he kind of has to compromise in that he is dejected by the loss of Geneviève. She doesn't appear to have she appears to have I don't know if it's fair to say she's let him down easy. She seems to have trailed off her affections in the letters, and he seems to have found out secondhand that she's
Yes,
gone married to somebody else, which is not great behavior. But he, as I said before, he chooses, he makes a choice, and I think, and he and he even has a line about this, like with the life where I've chosen to build,
Yeah,
and you're going to come in with me on this.
yeah,
And yes, I think there's a sense at the end, that he is happy. The film ends with him embracing
yeah,
Madeline. That's the final thing. Like Genevieve drives away. She's no longer there. He embraces Madeline.
yeah,
It is kind of triumphant. It's a very sad, a very moving ending, but it's kind of triumphant in some respects. She does not rock up with Roland Cassard, who's probably
no,
off traveling, dealing all this kind of stuff, dealing jewels, that is. And yes, I think there is a sense that, as I say, the profound thing in the film is, I think it's true of life
yeah,
that one can compromise and
yeah,
still come out good. That
yeah,
is that is real stuff.
yeah.
That's
And
real,
again, without wanting to harp on the point, that's one of the ways in which that's one of the sort of asymmetries in Parapluie that I think is ironed out in La La Land, because La La Land basically ends with the two of them kind of staring at each other across, Seb's jazz club, um, and they both kind of break into a sort of a half smile and a nod, and then turn around and go their separate ways, and the film ends. And that film ends, I feel, on complete parity. Yes, they've
yeah.
gone ways. They could have had a very different life together. Arguably, some of the flashback stuff hints that the Emma Stone character might have had a very different life that she would have enjoyed a lot. But I feel at the end of La La Land, they go their separate ways as complete equals, um, made totally different choices, diverged, both equal. I don't think that's how Parapluie ends. Actually, I think you're right. I think Genevieve looks like the one who's made the bigger compromises and is living with more dissatisfaction, which may be tolerable, whereas Guy has pretty much got everything that he wants, even if it's not the version of what he wants that he might have thought was going to happen sort of 6, 7, 8 years before that. Okay,
Yeah.
listen, I think we're probably done that point. Is there anything else we need to say before we wrap up? We have concluded. It is definitely Les Parapluies de Cherbourg is definitely a classic. Anything else before I close?
What do you think of him not wanting to see his child? Do you think
Yeah,
how do you feel about that decision? That's a very, very it almost seems loaded. It's like there's a maybe an implication that she has, in some senses, engineered this meeting. She's maybe knows
yeah,
that he runs that gas
yeah.
station as a
Again,
special.
that plays to what I was just saying. I feel like he's got the fortitude to decline that offer,
Mm.
but that's his daughter in the car. And it should be a slam dunk that she only has to offer out of politeness, which is what she does, gives him a signal that it would be okay to say hello, and that he's bound to go, "Oh, that'd be fantastic, thank you," and he just goes, "No."
Yeah,
And I think that's trivia fans, by the way. That's Demi's daughter in the car,
yeah,
um,
Rosalie. Yeah,
and the son, Guy's son, is Legrand's son. Um,
uh,
but fans of pub quizzes out there, that'll score you 2 marks, I think. Yeah,
not Demi's daughter is Varda's daughter. Demi's son is Matthew, but Rosalie is from a previous
oh,
relationship.
okay, Avada's daughter. Okay, thank you. Even better. All right, I think there's a bonus mark for that. Bonus mark.
Well, I think I
Um,
can say it is Demi's daughter, but not
but
Varda.
yeah, yeah. And no, I mean, I think just to come back to what you said, I think that just shows Guy strengthens his position in a way. His level of confidence, his sense that he's chosen happiness, and that what he's chosen is sufficient or more than sufficient for him. I think saying no to seeing his daughter is another opportunity for Guy to demonstrate that he's got everything that he wants. It still would have been a nice touch if he'd said yes. It's not a sign of weakness or dithering on his part, but the fact that he says no, I think from the point of view of the narrative of this film, you can think from a human point of view that he should have said yes. But from the point of view of the narrative arc of the film, I think it kind of completely validates the choices that he's made. He doesn't need to revisit any other part of his previous life. That's how I would interpret that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah, I think yeah, he makes the choice. Is our ending? He makes the choice, and as we say, I think he comes off well. I think that moment has a real charge to it that is, as you say, that's where the rubber hits the road on that one. Where he has to put the boundary up and say,
Yep.
"No, I've got a new life now, new child. You
Yep.
know, good luck."
Good luck. Yeah, I'm fine. You're fine. We're both fine.
We're both fine. That's the last thing in the film. As I say,
That's
it begins with a kind of banal exchange. It ends with one. How are you?
you.
Are you okay? I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, and
That's
that's
it.
all done. Yeah. Okay, on that note, I think we should finish. Thank you very much for watching and listening. Please like and subscribe, and do let us know in the comments if you've got any views about anything that we've said, and if you've got any views about films, other films that you'd like to see and hear us discuss. In the meantime, take care, and we hope to see you again.